Their engagement with the Māori community and the Māori kind of culture and Māori world, and their learning about the treaty and thinking about themselves in relation to the treaty actually made them feel more comfortable about their own identities.
Welcome to the Research and Reason podcast. Join us as we discuss the latest research, news and opinion from arts academics at the University of Auckland.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Julianne Evans aho. I'm Julianne Evans, the Media Advisor for the Faculty of Arts, and my guest today is Avril Bell, an Honorary Associate Professor of Sociology who has just written a new book, Becoming Tangata Tiriti, Working with Māori, Honouring the Treaty, and it's published by Auckland University Press. Tēnā koe, Avril, nice to be talking to you.
Tēnā koe, Julianne, nice to be here.
Your book, it's so interesting to be coming out right now. Tell me about the timing of that, because when you started the book, things were a bit different, weren't they? I'm imagining a couple of years ago.
Yeah. As you know, these things take time, and in fact, it is about 6 years since the project was first kind of started. But so the interviews in the book themselves are about 4 years old in that sense. And yeah, the times have changed a lot since then. You know, at that point, we were on a kind of a roll with lots of pro-Māori policies. If you're thinking around COVID times, right, too. But the government was, pursuing things that under the label of co-governance maybe, which became controversial. But there was a lot of things, a lot of workplaces were really moving ahead with treaty-led policies, te reo Māori policies, and so on and so forth. Things have shifted quite a lot since then. So at the time that I was planning the book, in fact, there was an argument that it wasn't really a great time for hearing Pākehā voices, that really Māori were taking the centre more and we should just be standing back, which was a really good argument, But I kind of pressed ahead anyway because I think that there's a lot of people who can, find value in hearing about the experiences of others. And now, it's going to be interesting to see what the reception of the book is when it comes out.
And just to clarify for listeners who might not know some of the terms that we're talking about here, the first one, Tangata Tiriti, can you elaborate on that a bit and just mention for people who might not know what our governing document is here in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, New Zealand?
Yeah, so the references to the Te Tiriti o Waitangi, or the Treaty of Waitangi in English, which was signed between the British and Māori, a number of Māori leaders, back in 1840. And that was the agreement that allowed the British to establish a colonial government here. So really everything that follows in terms of the New Zealand that we know today, in terms of the society, the infrastructure, the political system, economic system, everything, immigration, it all stems from that moment in time and that agreement where effectively Māori agreed to share their country with these newcomers. So for a long time we have talked about, a lot of talk about the treaty is about Māori and the Crown, Māori and the treaty. And there's a kind of common perception that the treaty is about Māori and for Māori, and it does, the British make commitments to protect Māori and to uphold Māori authority and Māori tikanga and so on. That is in the treaty, so that is correct. But on the other hand, it is also a treaty for the rest of us because, as I said, we wouldn't be here without it. And the wonderful thing about the idea of Tangata Tiriti, which translates as being people of the treaty, is that it is inclusive of everybody in New Zealand who's not Māori. The term for Māori that kind of pairs with Tangata Tiriti, obviously, being tangata whenua, the people of the land. So the rights of Māori and the place of Māori in New Zealand doesn't depend on the treaty. Because they were here before then, but for the rest of us, it has that really significant function. And that concept of tangata tiriti is a wonderful one for encompassing all the rest of us.
And it gives us a place, actually, doesn't it,
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
relationship? Because I think, I'm not sure if, I don't know, I think that's been a sort of a threatening situation for some people in this country, particularly people we refer to as Pākehā or white Europeans, perhaps. Whereas, in fact, in some ways it's a gift because it gives us a place and a right to be here.
Right. Yeah, there has been a lot of, there still is amongst a portion of the population, anxiety about treaty rights and Māori having special rights and things like that. But it is, one of the things that was interesting with the people I spoke to for the book was how they talked about their engagement with the Māori community and the Māori kind of culture and Māori world, and their learning about the treaty and thinking about themselves in relation to the treaty actually made them feel more comfortable about their own identities and more secure in their place here, rather than the kind of things that I think a lot of people who are against the treaty, say, would fear, that it's all, that it's somehow taking something away from us, whereas in fact the opposite is correct.
How did you decide who to speak to? And I imagine under different themes, that was what it was. Yeah. Because these are people who are mostly work. It's the world of work you're focusing on, isn't it?
Yeah.
And people who in their jobs engage with Māori or work for Māori.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. So yes, I deliberately wanted to focus on workplace relationships and as you say, people whose jobs require them to work with Māori, either within their own organisation. Some of them, work with Māori within their organisations. Some were working as what we call, sometimes call mainstream organisations, working with Māori communities. Like if you think local government, work with Māori communities on all kinds of projects. Some were working for Māori inside Māori-led organisations. And I thought, as we said at the beginning, really, because this is a growing area in our society, and Māori population is growing as well, for that matter. I thought that there wasn't a resource already available for people that directly related to work and workplace relationships. I really wanted to find people via Māori and ask Māori people, who do you find good to work with? Not me deciding, that person's great, but ask Māori leaders that I knew, who's somebody that you find, or, useful to, good, not useful, it's really constructive to work with. And so some of the people that I talked to came to me that way, but not all of them, as it turned out, because I heard, got word of mouth, one person would pass me on to another, and there were also some people that I already knew about, but so in a way they're kind of ordinary people. There's two people there who are relatively well-known public figures, but they're fairly ordinary people on one level, but they're also people with a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom, I think, because they've been working in sort of treaty-oriented work, I guess, for quite a long time, so they've accumulated quite a bit of knowledge and, advice that they can pass on to others.
You've got a couple of mayors in there too, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. Ex-mayors, former mayors.
Yeah.
So...
and not everybody is identifiable that you've spoken to in the
That's right. I asked people if they would like me to use their real name or if they would like a pseudonym. And some... When it came to the two former mayors, who are Meng Foon and Andrew Judd...
and for people who don't know, those mayors were...
So Meng Foon was the mayor of Gisborne.
In the North Island, yep.
Yep, on the east coast. And then, in fact, when I interviewed him, he was just about to take up his next role as the Race Relations Conciliator with the Human Rights Commission.
That's a national position, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And the other former mayor was Andrew Judd, who was the mayor of New Plymouth on the other coast of the North Island, on the west coast. Yeah, but other people, people who chose pseudonyms, there would be a range of reasons for that, to do with protecting other people that they might have spoken about in their workplaces, or not wanting to, not that I was asking people to be critical of their workplaces either, but, just not wanting to put their families or whatever on the spot. I don't know any of that. Who knows? I don't know all the reasons why people might have wanted pseudonyms. So in the end, what I've done is, apart from those two people who are political figures, I have just used first names. And nobody, you can't really tell unless you know the people who's a pseudonym and who's, their actual name.
Were there some themes that came across to you, sort of united the book in terms of all the people you spoke to? Were there some things that you could distill for people to give them a flavour of what matters to these people and how have they worked with Māori constructively? The book's called Becoming Tangata Tiriti, so that becoming is very deliberate in the sense that it's a journey, and everybody's, the people I spoke to are on that journey themselves, even though, as I say, they have a lot of experience. Things will have changed for some of them, since I spoke to them, and they will have moved on in some way or another or learnt some new things, right? So it's not a thing that's over. So there is a sort of a journey trajectory to the book in a way, in the sense that we start with their early encounters with the Māori world and how those things took place for them, and start with, I guess, general principles. I mean, it's thematic, but it's not, what am I going to say about that? It's not chronological per se, fully throughout the whole thing, but start with general principles that they would say are kind of crucial to working in this space. Then there's some two chapters that focus on where they sit structurally in a way, like, are they working for Māori organisations or with Māori communities or with, and in fact there's a chapter on working with Tangata Tiriti, working with their own people, because part of the work that we need to do to change our society is to educate our own. And there is a chapter on this whole two worlds thing is kind of interesting, and I wanted to I didn't want it to be overly simplified. So on the one hand, I grew up in a time when, there was really pretty much a disconnect between the Pākehā world and the Māori world. And we might have had Māori neighbours, and you might have worked with Māori people. I went to school with Māori kids or whatever. But there was still, we never really entered the Māori world. It was all on our terms and on our sort of territory, if you like. And Māori in fact, world, it was easy to ignore in a way, completely, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which is shameful to admit.
Yeah,
but it just wasn't. Even you didn't even have to be making an effort to ignore it.
That's right, because if you look back, I've studied our history a bit, and if you think, my ancestors effectively came here with the idea of taking over and pushing the Māori world out and basically destroying it in the name of civilising, right? That their society and their systems were superior to Māori. So the consequence of that, Māori, have survived that, but the consequence was that the things, Māori ways of doing things were kind of restricted to people's private lives, in their houses and on marae and so on, and the rest of us just could completely ignore all that. So there is a section in the book. So the other thing about that is, we now need to, the Māori world is kind of coming back towards the centre of our society where it should be. So we need to engage with it. We need to learn how to enter that world and operate in that world and to understand it a little bit. But the other thing that's the sort of paradox and the complexity is we also need to protect its difference from our own world because of the history of colonisation, which has been all about completely destroying it and assimilating Māori into our own world, we have to be careful to not appropriate or not to take over or to move too far and, into a Māori context, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a...
It's a fine balance between working alongside and trying to understand and suddenly just sort of moving in and building, another edifice inside that, taking over, like we usually do. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a couple of chapters in the book that address that in different kinds of ways. There's one about, bridging the boundaries between the worlds but also protecting them, and one about stepping up and stepping back, how to be useful and active and support Māori aspirations and initiative, but not to take over, and sometimes needing to just sit back, because particularly if you're a Pākehā person, we're used to being in charge and we're used to being comfortable and at the heart of things and the dominant people. So it's quite a thing for us to learn to sit back, and quite a salutary kind of lesson, I guess. And if you're a sort of a professional or an expert in some field, even more, there is a sort of, our work lives require, we're supposed to be the expert, we're supposed to know things. But so then to be able to be prepared to sort of sit back and let somebody else's expertise come to the fore, that's quite a
skill.
Challenge. Yeah, and it's a skill. And to know when to do that,
I think you make a point in the book about the value of relationships in Māori life and Māori world, and how we're a little bit sort of focused on the goal and getting there in a hurry and as quickly and as possible, and along the way not necessarily valuing relationships. Did you feel like that was a big thing that people were telling you in the book?
Yeah, massive. Yeah, they talked, that was a really big thing that came up in terms of advice for anybody who wants to work successfully with Māori, is to really focus on your relationships and building and maintaining relationships, and not being, as you say, that sort of transactional thing we often have in the European or Pākehā world, where a work relationship, it might be time-bound and just, we've got this contract and we'll work with you for the time period of that and then it's over. Whereas in the Māori culture, or from a Māori perspective, relationships are, the idea is that they stay long-term, that they persist,
and that they come from further back, don't they? Because there's that whole whakapapa where you come from, your ancestors, all those who are still sort of sitting on your shoulder some of the time. So it's a very complex thing, being connected in the Māori world.
Yeah, so in that sense, the kind of work world and the personal world kind of, the boundaries between those blur, right? In the sense that, in a Māori context, if we turn up, Māori are not just interested in what we have to offer in terms of professional expertise or whatever, but they want to know who we are and where do our ancestors come from, where do we fit in the scheme of things, and they like us to know that stuff, right? So because those things are incredibly important in the Māori world, and I think we have a lot to gain from becoming more relational in our own ways of thinking and operating. I have to say, I think that's one of the things that we can learn from Māori, which would stand us in good stead.
Do you have an aspiration for this book? Beyond lots of people reading it, I imagine. Is it for everybody?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I hoped, I've written it to be for a general readership, so for the general public. And I really hope that people who are in those sorts of roles, where they are, in the workplace, or maybe it's not work, maybe it's something else, a sports connection or anything else, where they don't necessarily have a lot of knowledge about the Māori world and Māori people, but are keen to learn more, that this would be a useful resource for them. So that's the hope, that it's really a kind of like to some degree, an introductory level kind of resource for people who are just starting out on the path that the people in the book have already been travelling on for some time, if you like. Yeah.
And when are we going to be able to buy it, and where?
I would imagine it'll be in a lot of bookshops. Not my responsibility working out where it goes, but I see our city library has got 37 copies on order, I hear from my partner. So yeah, it'll be out there.
It's a topic of the moment as well, and I think it's going to be particularly important in the next few years where some of these ideas might be challenged on a political level. So it's interesting to have this flax roots work just continuing on, isn't it, in the background of anything that might change.
Yeah. I've been so this is I've been thinking about, one of the virtues of being a person of a certain age is that, I've seen the trajectory we followed since the establishment of the Waitangi Tribunal, I think in particular, in 1975. So it's be 50 years next year.
And what was the purpose of that, just for...
Yeah, the Waitangi Tribunal was set up to investigate the breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi by the government. Breaches by the government. So going back to what we were talking about earlier, the treaty made commitments to protect Māori authority and land holdings and anything, the word taonga is in the treaty, anything basically that Māori valued to keep hold of and wanted to hold on to, such as their language.
Treasure, doesn't it?
Treasure, yeah, that's right. So, and of course then not that long after the signing of the document in 1840, the colonial government began to, make policies and undertake actions that breached that agreement effectively. So this 135 years later, in 1975, the tribunal was set up. And since it's been quite a gradual, but it's a long-term shift we have gone through in the nearly 50 years since that time. You were talking about the current kind of situation we're under, where the government is undoing some of the policies that have been put in place that support the restoration of the Māori world. But I think if I look at that long trajectory, this government will be 3 years in its term, and even if some of them are re-elected after that, it won't be the same government quite. We can't tell the future about that. But I think the changes that have taken place will outlive that. I think that, as you say, you used the word flax roots, right, or grassroots, that on the ground, not at the great heights of the government, people are just getting on with the job, and there's still lots of goodwill and lots of efforts and lots of things going forward. So hopefully, and I think I have faith that the whole project will, outlive the current government.
And especially in the language, the area of te reo Māori as well, don't you think? Our whole society has moved on so much in terms of signs, greetings, sometimes hearing, something in English and then in te reo Māori. I don't think we'll go back on that. I think, the bulk of people have moved the dial forward on that. It feels like that to me, having been around as well for a while. Yeah, which is very heartening.
Yeah, I think people are becoming really comfortable with hearing te reo Māori spoken. I think it's sad that we still have to have, our own institution just opened a dedicated space in our library.
Our university library.
In our university library, for a reo space for people to be able to speak te reo Māori. And I was in New Plymouth recently talking to Andrew Judd, and he took me to a cafe where they have a table where people can do the same thing, right, where you can speak the language. But, I think that's incredibly telling that we're talking about a society, this is Māori's home country, and you have to have special... It's
an official language here, isn't it?
But you have to create a special place for people to be able to have conversation in the language. I've forgotten why we ever started with that.
That's all right.
But it took me to that. But I think that's really telling, isn't it? And
Yeah.
a bit tragic. But so it's important that we, that we are becoming comfortable at least with hearing it, and hopefully over time, more and more of us speaking it and being able to be comfortable with those kinds of conversations being all around us and be able to respond to people in Te Reo Māori when they do speak to us,
Because a way into the whole Māori world is through the language as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I am not, ashamed to say, like a lot of Pākehā New Zealanders don't speak other languages than English. We have that. It's one of the privileges of being an English speaker, right? You don't really need to. You don't need to learn other languages, but we also miss out on lots of things. It's possibly true about other languages as well, but I know for sure it's true about the Māori language that it's not just, a different word for saying the same thing. That with the language comes a kind of a whole world, a whole way of thinking and philosophy about the relationships between things and all the rest of it. So there's so much wealth of knowledge and stuff to be gained from, that language surviving and from access to it. Yeah.
Well, that's a good moment to finish things on, I think. Thank you so much for coming in, ngā mihi nui, Avril Bell, and I wish you all the best with the book.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Research and Reason podcast. Stay up to date with the Faculty of Arts by following us on social media.